So this is the Unit 8 review part 2. We're going to continue on at question 26. What is the measure of angle ADP? ADP, which is right here in rectangle ABCD. Well, when we have two parallel lines cut by a transversal, we know that if this angle is 50, this angle is also 50 because they are alternate interior angles. And then we also know that every rectangle, all the corners are 90 degrees. So if the total of this corner is 90 degrees, we know that this angle, our missing angle, and this angle that we just figured out are complementary, which means they add up to 90 degrees. So if I simply take 90 minus 50, I get 40 degrees, which is the measure of angle ADP. 27. In the figure below, angle ABE is 30 degrees. What does the measure of angle CBE, right here, the measure of angle CDE, and the measure of angle EDA, what do they have to equal to prove it is a rectangle? So in rectangles, all the corners have to be 90 degrees. So if this is 30, we simply take 90 minus 30, get 60 degrees. This angle must equal 60 degrees. Again, these lines are parallel, cut by a transversal. So in order for it to be a rectangle, this angle, angle EDA, must be 60 degrees as well. And this angle, angle CDE, must equal 30 degrees for it to be a rectangle. The figure below, AB equals BC, which equals CD, which equals DA. What is the measure of BEC? Well, as you can see, all four of these lines are congruent. They are opposite lines are also parallel, and the diagonals are bisected. So therefore, this has to be a rhombus, and in a rhombus, the diagonals are perpendicular. Therefore, this angle has to be a right angle, which means that the measure of angle BEC has to be 90 degrees. A square is a quadrilateral, always. A rhombus is a rectangle, sometimes when they are squares. A trapezoid is never a parallelogram. Parallelograms have two pairs of parallel sides. Trapezoids only have one. Diagonals of a rhombus are congruent, sometimes, again, in a square. A kite is never a trapezoid. Kites have no parallel lines. Trapezoids have one. Diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. This is always. What properties do parallelograms, rhombuses, rectangles, and squares all have in common? Well, this is on our lists of the different, we made a foldable, on day 2 we had a checklist. There are 5 different properties. Opposite sides are parallel. Opposite sides are congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. Consecutive angles, sorry, my pen disappeared. Consecutive angles are congruent. Or not congruent, sorry. Consecutive angles are supplementary. They add up to 180. And the diagonals bisect each other. These are the 5 properties that all of these shapes share. What properties is / are unique to squares and rectangles? Well, squares and rectangles both have 4 right angles, and their diagonals are congruent. Those are the 2 properties specific to squares and rectangles. What properties / is / are unique to squares and rhombuses? Unlike squares and rectangles, squares and rhombuses, their diagonals bisect the opposite angles, I should say. All their sides are congruent, 4 sides, and the diagonals are perpendicular. They make 90-degree angles. What properties / is / are unique to trapezoids? Trapezoids are quadrilaterals with 1 pair of parallel sides. Unique to kites. Kites have no parallel sides. Inline. The line y equals 1/4 x plus 5 contains segment AB, a parallelogram ABCD. What is the slope of DC? So this is y equals 1/4 x plus 5. And y equals, in this format, we know that this is our slope. We also know that AB has to be parallel to DC, so they need to have the same slope because parallel lines have the same slope. So the slope of DC has to equal 1/4. In rhombus ABCD, the slope of DB is 2/7. What is the slope of AC? Seeing this is a rhombus, we know that the diagonals are perpendicular. Therefore, the slopes have to be the negative reciprocal. So we flip the fraction and flip the sign. So the slope of AC must equal -7/2. Excuse me. In square ABCD, the slope of AB is 0. What is the slope of both DA and BC? We know that DA and BC are going to be parallel, so they will have the same slope. If AB is 0, that means it's a perfectly horizontal line, which means CB and DA are perfectly vertical, and vertical lines have no slope or undefined. Use the graph to answer the following questions. Do the vertices on the graph create a quadrilateral? Yes or no? Well, if I were to connect the dots, this is in fact a shape with 4 sides. So yes, it has 4 sides. That's what makes it a quadrilateral. Do the vertices on the graph create a parallelogram? Yes or no? Well, so this is yes. Well, if it's a parallelogram, we need to prove it's a parallelogram. And one way to do that is to prove that the sides are parallel. If the opposite sides are parallel, then they have to have the same slope. So we need to find the slope of all 4 sides. How do you do that? Rise over run. So the slope of AD, you rise up 1 and run 2. AD, the slope is 1/2. CB, the slope is 1/2. They are, in fact, parallel. Next, we need to see if AB and DC are parallel. The slope of AB is 2/-1. AB equals 2 over negative 1, or negative 2 over 1. And the slope of CD is 2 over negative 1 again. CD equals 2 over negative 1. They do have the same slope, therefore they are parallel, and this is a parallelogram because they have the same slopes. 45. Do the vertices on the graph create a rhombus? So in order for this to be a rhombus, we can prove it several different ways. Since it is already a parallelogram, we can prove that the sides are congruent. All sides congruent. In order to do so, we have to use the Pythagorean theorem. So I am going to draw a right triangle to be able to use. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. A is going to be 2 and b is going to be 1. So 2 squared plus 1 squared equals c squared. 4 plus 1 equals c squared. 5 equals c squared. So the length of DC is the square root of 5. Now we can do this side. This is going to be 2 and 1. So my equation is going to be 2 squared plus 1 squared equals c squared. It is the same equation, so c is going to be equal to the square root of 5. These are, in fact, the same length. Because we know it's a parallelogram already, we proved it in question 44, we know that opposite sides are going to be congruent. Therefore, yes, it is a rhombus because all sides are congruent. 46. Do the vertices on the graph create a rectangle? Well, in order for it to be a rectangle, it must have it has to be a parallelogram, first of all, which we already proved, and all right angles. We've already found the slope in question 44. So for right angles to be created, lines must be perpendicular, and we know that lines are perpendicular when they have the negative reciprocal slope. Negative reciprocal slope. So AB, its slope is 2 over negative 1. And CB, the slope is 1/2. And they are in fact flipped and flipped. The fraction is flipped and the sign is flipped, so they are perpendicular. And we can look at all 4 corners and you will find that they are in fact right angles. They are perpendicular, so therefore yes, because there are right angles. Lastly, 47, do the vertices on the graph create a square? Yes, they do. The way to prove it's a square is by proving it's both a rhombus and a rectangle, and we've already done so. So it is a rhombus and it is a rectangle. So number 45 and number 46 prove this to be a square. And that's it for the review.